Welcome back to Fidelis. This is Cassie here. Lauren is not with us today because she is in Washington, D.C. for the March for Life. So today we have a special guest. And first I want to just say really quickly, we want to encourage everyone to pray today, please, for everyone that is at the March for Life and to pray for an end to abortion. So today we have Carrie. Carrie is a friend of Fidelis, and she has some very interesting stories that she can tell. So, Carrie, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, my name's Carrie. I'm married to my husband, Derek. We've been married for 8 years. We live in Hollidaysburg, Pennsylvania now. We used to live in Frederick shortly after we got married. I have 4 kids from ages 7 down to almost 2. My husband, I stayed home and homeschooled the kids, and my husband works for the VA hospital here.
Okay. Now, one of the reasons that we wanted to talk to you is because, like Lauren, you were a nun before.
I was, yeah.
So, just, I guess to start with, when did you start considering religious life?
Well, I started to consider it when I was shortly before high school. I'll give a little bit of a background story. I grew up, I was baptized Catholic. I went to Catholic school, but for various reasons, my family, when I was a little kid, we stopped going to church every Sunday. But when I was in 7th and 8th grade, we had a 2-year preparation for confirmation at my school. And that's kind of when I really just fell in love with the faith. I read everything I could about the lives of the saints. They just really, really inspired me. I went to the library and I would pick out any books that I could find on Catholicism, and I would just read everything I could about the faith because I just kind of fell in love. And so it was during that time period that I realized that people actually do go into religious life. We were taught by religious sisters, but there weren't very many of them. They were elderly. They didn't wear habit. And I didn't really realize that was something that people did anymore. But in reading about certain things, I realized that it's something that people actually do. So that kind of was the catalyst to start into my discernment. And actually, when I started high school, it kind of was in the back of my mind the whole time that I was there. It was like on and off. I was thinking, should I pursue this? Should I not? But so it was really during high school that I started to really consider it.
Now, what is the process of discernment when you're, deciding to, go into religious life or not? How does that typically work? What do you do?
Well, what I did is, it started with a desire, and I had a spiritual director, and that for me was my parish priest at the time. But other people, it's recommended that you get someone who, like a priest or someone who can kind of help you through with it. Originally I was interested in the cloistered life because the patroness of my parish was St. Therese, and she was a cloistered Carmelite. And so I thought, well, hey, I want to do that. I want to be just like St. Therese. I want to join the cloister. But in talking with my spiritual director, he was like, well, what if God is calling you to an active community? And at first I was like, oh, no, that's not me. But when I started to think about it, I was like, you know what, maybe I should. So part of the discernment then was talking with my spiritual director about, what I should do and things like that. And he could give me some outside insight into things. I would pray a lot. At that time, we had a perpetual adoration chapel at my parish. And so I would go to adoration a lot. I would pray every day, kind of like a rule of prayer. Every day I'd have, prayers that I would pray. Going to mass as often as I could. And then I would also write to communities. I would contact them. I would write to them. I would actually visit them. So that was part of the discernment there, is actually going to the communities and seeing what they're like and seeing if that is what I feel called to.
And which community did you eventually feel drawn to?
I went to the Sister Servants of the Eternal Word in Birmingham, Alabama. I had visited a few other communities, like some people are familiar with the Dominican Sisters of Mary, Mother of the Eucharist in Michigan, and I love their community. I almost applied to join, but I thought, well, no, I think there's something else. There was a community of sisters who taught me in high school, and I visited their community and things like that. But it was the Sister Servants in Birmingham. They were a smaller community, active contemplatives, so they had an active apostolate, but they also had a very strong communal prayer life that really attracted me. So when I went down there, I was just like, okay, this is it. This is where I want to be.
And how did your parents react to the news when you told them this is what you wanted to do?
Well, my parents were actually, they weren't really thrilled with it, which, is understandable because you think, they're not going to see me as much anymore. They're not going to be able to talk to me every day. So I know it was a really big sacrifice, especially for my mom. She was really, it was hard for her, but she was trying to be supportive as much as she could. But I could tell, it was hard for them. They thought, well, because I was considering entering directly after high school. And because our community accepts people, at that time period. Some communities require a bit of college, some require degrees. It really depends on the community. So I was going to enter directly after high school, and my mom was really like, why don't you just go to college first? Maybe get out of your system. But I really felt like I needed to do this now. It really was what I felt like I needed to do. So I know it was a cross for them.
Mm-hmm. And so did you end up going to college first?
I didn't, actually. I entered the convent 3 months after I graduated from high school. I joined my community. I graduated in May, and then, I joined on July 16th of 2003.
Now, what is the application process like and acceptance and all of that?
Well, the application process for my community was you had like a form to fill out. They would ask you questions about your life, ask you questions about, just general things, also your spiritual life too. Also, like they have an interview, like I had an interview with a superior, like she would talk to me and kind of just get an idea if this is something that, if I have the maturity to enter, if I need to wait a little longer or not.
Mm-hmm.
So it was filling out the forms and having an interview with the superior. And then basically I just waited on her word, whether she thought it was okay for me to enter or if I should wait or her word was the last word.
Okay. And so once you got accepted, you just go and what happens then?
Well, once the acceptance happened, I think I applied in like the fall of my senior year, I think. And then I got accepted. So it was like getting ready. You have a list of things that you're going to need to bring with you to the convent. Like some things are weird, like you have to bring like handkerchiefs, you have to bring certain kinds of, garments and stuff. And I had to get my postulant outfit made, which is like a vest and a skirt. It's kind of like a uniform that you wear before you receive the habit of the community. So I just had to like make sure I had, basically everything in order. I had to make sure I had the books that I needed to bring with me, the different clothes that I needed to bring with me, and just made sure like all my affairs and stuff were in order, which wasn't that much because I was in high school. But, for people who are older, you can understand they need to get some things in order first.
And so once you then left and entered the convent, what was it like at first?
Well, it was kind of a little bit of a shock because things were different. Like we had community silence during different times of the day. And so, for most secular people, that's a big change from what they're used to. They're not used to having silence during the day. So that was something that took a little getting used to. It's the rhythm of the day, like going to prayers and stuff like that, was great, really great. But it's, it takes a little getting used to, and the different like culture of the community, like the way that we did different things, how we did, our daily schedule and things like that. So it took a bit of getting used to.
Were there other people there that were, as young as you were or on the younger side?
Yes, actually there were. Thankfully, there's a few sisters who had entered a few years before me who were similar in age. One of them had entered after high school, just like I did. So that was nice to have someone like that. I also entered with another person. She had just graduated from college, so she was older than me, but it was nice to have someone to enter with because we kind of got to experience it together. So.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And what was like your daily life like as a postulant and, what kind of things do you do as a nun? Because I think a lot of people, they don't really know what goes on.
Yeah.
Religious life,
Right,
so
right.
what's it like, just regular day-to-day basis?
Well, we followed our daily schedule every single day. We woke up at 5:30, I think, every day. And then we had an hour of adoration in the morning, and then we'd had our morning prayers. And then after that, we had breakfast. After that, we had like our daily duties. We had, especially as postulants, we had a bunch of cleaning duties afterwards. After that, we had our classes with the novice mistress. So she would be giving us formation classes just about like what religious life is and, you know, what it means. And also some theology. Like we learned a lot. We learned a lot. Like we really did learn a lot. And we also became certified catechists when we were in the convent. So part of that was, you know, earning our certification that way. Then we'd have I think our mass was at noon in the convent. So we'd have mass, then we'd have noon prayers. After that, we'd have some more like duties that we would do. We'd have more classes, time for study. We'd also have recreation time, which is really
Mhm.
important, especially with the novitiate. Basically, just like playing board games or going outside for a walk, just something, you know, to kind of, you know, break it up a little bit, you know, to have some fun together with the other sisters. And then we'd have prayers again in the evening, and then we'd have dinner, and then we'd have the entire community would have recreation together, which is the
Mhm.
same kind of thing, like playing games together. Sometimes we'd watch a movie, like especially on feast days and stuff like that. We'd watch movies. Usually they were like the old movies from like the 40s, 30s, and 40s. So it was really cool. We got to watch some of those movies together, and then we'd have night prayer, and which is really beautiful. And then after night prayer, we would go to bed.
Was it a difficult adjustment for you? Or did you find it pretty easily, just kind of transition into that lifestyle?
I think it wasn't. I think it was a pretty. I think in general it was a pretty easy transition because it's something that you really wanted to do. You know, you really wanted to embrace the life and make this, you know, who you are. Um, and it's really beautiful. Like we had part of like that was our daily life during the week. We had retreats that we would offer twice a month. And
Mhm.
so we'd have people come from all over. Like people even came up from different countries to come to these retreats because we had some really good retreat masters who would come and give retreats. And
Mhm.
so during the retreats, we had a little bit of a different schedule, but the sisters were always encouraged to sit in on the retreats, like when the retreat master was giving a conference. And so we heard some really amazing talks about the spiritual life, about the church. I mean, we learned so much just by sitting in on those talks. It was actually really, really cool.
And how were you said your parents were having some difficulty. How
Yeah.
did they handle it once you were actually in the convent? Did
You know,
they
they
spend
handled it pretty
time?
well. They handled it pretty well. My mom was actually really, really great. I think she took that opportunity to increase her own faith and kind of, you know, really try and help her own spiritual life. So that was really, really cool to see. Um, and they got to visit twice a year.
Mhm.
Different convents have different rules about that. Like some communities allow their sisters to go home for a time, like every year. Our community was more like they would come to us twice a year, and it was actually kind of cool because you had the all the different sisters' families would come around the same time. So the sisters' families got to know each other,
Mhm.
and that was really nice because they all they got to talk to each other about it because they were all kind of going through the same thing with their kid in the convent now, and so that was really neat to see.
Now, you said it was in Mississippi,
In Alabama.
Alabama. I'm sorry. Was this and it was the Sisters of the Eternal Word?
Hmm.
Is that like EWTN? Is
No,
it no?
no, actually, the
Like I
community
was thinking, like, is it like affiliated? Like,
it's
is it
not
Mother
well.
Angelica's,
Kinda,
order?
kinda. Originally, when Mother Angelica started EWTN, she had the community of men, which is the Franciscan Missionaries of the Eternal Word that many people know, and she wanted a religious community of sisters, active sisters, because Mother Angelica's community is cloistered, and so she had asked Mother Gabriel, who was our superior. She was originally a Nashville Dominican, one of the Dominican Sisters of St. Cecilia in Nashville, Tennessee. And she had asked her to come down and kind of help with the network because she was a Dominican. And so she knew, church doctrine and everything really, really well. So, she kind of helped out with the network in that respect. And it kind of was like an inspiration to start the community. Originally, I so it was kind of like co-founded, I guess you could say, with Mother Angelica. She kind of helped the catalyst towards it, but
Mhm.
then Mother Gabriel began the retreat house and everything. And so we always had like a close relationship with Mother Angelica and the Franciscan missionaries, but it wasn't quite like the same, if that makes sense.
Now, how long did you stay at the convent, and does your role change like over time? Like, how does it work?
It kind of does. The role kind of does change over time. As you, go up, first you start as a postulant, and then you become a novice. And that's when you get the habit. You wear a white veil instead of a dark veil. And you get your new name too. In the convent, my name was Sister Mary Faustina of Our Lady of Mercy. That was my religious name. And and then, the novitiate is like a especially intense time of preparation and formation in religious life. And then you have temporary vows that you take for 5 years. So at the end of 8 years altogether, then you make your final vows. So your roles do change. Like you get more responsibilities the older you get. I mean, you do get older, but as you go up in the ranks, so to speak. So yeah. And I was actually there for 5 years, which is a lot longer than most people who are not completely sure of their vocation stay. It was kind of apparent to me after the first year that I just wasn't really well suited, but I'm nothing if not stubborn. And I really thought, because I wanted to give my life to God. That was the big thing for me, is that I really just wanted to give my life to God. And I thought this is the best way that I can do it. And so when it became apparent that it just wasn't like meshing, I was like, well, I got to fix myself. There's something wrong with me. I have to give my life to God this way. And so at the end of those 5 years, it kind of just became apparent that it just, no matter what I did, it just wasn't going to work. It just wasn't. I was trying to force a vocation that I really wasn't called to do. And so I left. I actually had it was at the end of my my year of temporary vows that I had left.
What was it that made you see that this was not the right vocation for you?
I mean, it's kind of hard to put it in words. I think I was really miserable about a lot of things. And I did think, like, in the back of my mind, I was like, well, you should be married. And I was like, well, what the heck? Why would you even think that? You're a nun now. You can't think that. You can't think that. What the heck? So, it just seemed like I was, trying to put a square peg in a round hole, like in every aspect. It just wasn't like meshing. I just didn't feel at peace, that peace that you really, that you really get from God. That peace wasn't there. And I was getting more and more miserable. And so I knew I just had to do something about that. So.
Did the other sisters know that you were having difficulties, or did you?
My superiors did. Yes, my superiors did. Because I always kept in contact with them about it. Some of the other sisters didn't know, because there was really not an opportunity really to talk about it like that. And I didn't really want, especially like if I was meant to be a nun, I didn't want to like have them know about that, the struggles, so they didn't really know, but my superiors did.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, what was their take on this, on your feelings that you were having?
Well, I think they kind of, at first it was kind of like, well, this could be a temptation. Let's treat it like that. But I think towards the end it was like mutual, like, hey, okay, it's time for you to do what you think God's calling you to do.
And so what is the process like when you make that decision to leave?
Well, I mean, it's really hard. I must say, like, making the decision to leave was the hardest decision I think I've ever had to make. It was really, it was harder than making the decision to enter, because I had been there for 5 years and the community had come to rely on me for a bunch of things. And, I loved the sisters and I loved the life. I really did. But I just knew I had to go forward. So, I basically, because I basically just, arranged for my mom to come get me at the end. And God bless my mom. She traveled 13 hours by herself to come get me. So.
I mean, is there anything you have to, because I mean, you said you take your temporary vows. So is it just at the end of those 5 years, it's just, well, this isn't for me, so I'm going to go.
I mean,
Or
you
is there like a
can
process
be.
of what you have to do? Or,
Basically, it can be. I mean, it's a lot different if you make perpetual vows. I mean, that's a whole different thing. But basically, like if you're at the end of your temporary vows, or you're in the novitiate, or you're a postulant, you can basically just, say, okay, I think I'm done. I'm going to leave now, and just leave. I mean, it's difficult when you've been there for 5 years, because I had nothing. Like I had no clothes to bring with me. I had nothing. I had a few books and a few like undergarments, and that's it. So my mom had to bring a bunch of stuff for me. But yeah, I mean, if it's early on when someone feels like they don't have, like this isn't the life that they're called to, they really can just leave. So I think that's why a lot of people, like, they might be afraid to look into religious life, but there's a long process of formation. It's not like you go in and that's that. You have, you're there forever. They have a long process of formation, and up until perpetual vows, there's, you can leave at various points in time if you feel like that's not what you're called to do.
yeah, just out of curiosity, what happens if you've made your perpetual vows and you want to leave?
I think you have to petition the Holy See. I think that's it. It's kind of complicated because it depends on like what kind of community you are in. There's like pontifical rite communities that are, because like whenever you start a religious community, and our community was rather new, so we were a diocesan community. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, you start as like a private association of the faithful, then a public association of the faithful, and like as you gain members, you gain more a higher status.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it really depends on the status of the community. But most people think of like pontifical rite communities, which is generally most of the communities that people would be knowledgeable about. And I think it involves like a petition to the Holy See to get it, I think. But I don't know exactly. I don't really remember, to be honest.
So once your mom came and got you and you left, I mean, what were your feelings and your thoughts? Like how did you handle the
It
transition
was,
of them
oh
leaving?
my gosh, it was really, really difficult. It was really difficult. I was really upset just because like, you have the feeling like that you're letting people down. Like 'cause when I was in the convent, that was like my biggest fear. Part of what made me stay for so long is like, well, everybody thought I was supposed to be a nun, so I'm going to be letting everybody down. I can't do that.
Yeah.
But then in leaving, it's like, well, I'm going to be letting the community down. These are sisters that I know and love, and I've gotten close to them over the last 5 years. I don't want to let them down. So it was really like I was really torn. I mean, it was very emotionally difficult, especially at that time. But I think for me, I knew it was what I had to do. And I think the morning because I met my mom at a hotel and we stayed there overnight before we drove back. The next morning, I was very convicted that like, hey, this is what you need to do. You're doing the right thing. And it was kind of like a sense of peace and freedom, kind of that peace and freedom that I hadn't been experiencing all those 5 years that I was in the convent. It was
Mhm.
like the start of that. It was like the start of a new life. So it was, bittersweet.
Have you kept in touch with any of the sisters?
I have actually kept in touch with the sisters. I speak to them every now and then. Like I let them know of the birth of each of my children when that happened, and eventually I'd love to go on a retreat down there at some point. But yeah, so yeah, it's been nice to keep in touch with them every now and then. I mean, not too often, but for important events and things like that.
And so after you left, what did you do after that? Did you go to college or,
Well, after I enrolled in a local community college to kind of get started on that.
Mhm.
Um, I began work with the Pennsylvania Pro-Life Federation. I
Mhm.
worked with them at their headquarters in Harrisburg, so it was really nice. It was actually really amazing how all that came together because, like I said, when I left, I had nothing. And I was feeling really down because it's like, all of my friends, they were already, they had their degrees, they had successful jobs, some of them they were starting their families. And here I was just starting from scratch. So it was a little bit discouraging, but God really worked it out because when I came out, there was a man who was a parishioner at my parish, and he basically encouraged me to apply for this job for the pro-life organization. And so I did. And it was just wonderful to be able to, start up working for them.
And you are now married. How did you meet your husband?
I am. Well, not too long after, it's kind of a funny story. Not too long after I left the convent, like I said, I was getting really down because everybody was like, everybody that I knew was, had their whole life, and I was just like starting from scratch. So my mom, being like, God bless her, my mom is just an amazing, amazing woman. She wanted to cheer me up. So she's like, okay, let's look at these like Catholic dating sites. Let's just look and see. So we sat down together and we were like laughing and laughing. And then we saw someone who like looked like someone I might be interested in. And that's kind of when it stopped being a joke. And my mom signed me up for a subscription. So I actually met my husband on Catholic Match online. We kind of connected. I had actually prayed a novena to Saint Raphael, who is kind of the patron saint of like people finding their spouse. And after I met him, it was just kind of like the rest was history. We kind of knew right away that like there's something special here. So,
And so, I mean, you got married, you have 4 children now. Has it, has your married life and your life as a mother, like, is that influenced by your time in the convent at all?
absolutely, absolutely. I always tell people like even though I didn't like stay in the convent, I'm so grateful for that time there because it really shaped me into the woman I am today. I learned so much about the faith. I learned so much about just like simple stuff like cleaning. I can clean like a boss now because I learned at the convent, like they clean things really well. I learned to cook. I actually helped run the bookstore when we were there. So I learned about, like business in the convent. I was actually kind of like a personal secretary to our chaplain, who
Mm-hmm.
was Father Lambert Greenan, a Dominican, an Irish Dominican. And he is the founding editor of L'Osservatore Romano, the Vatican
Oh,
newspaper, the English version. So he
mhm.
was in the Vatican for like, I think 35 years. So he had so many amazing stories and just a wealth of knowledge, and I learned from him. So all of that knowledge has really helped me in my married life. So yeah, it really, I always tell people it's really shaped me into the woman I am today.
Does it help with raising your children in the faith?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think it really helps because, you have a lot of knowledge, like, um, that you don't really necessarily learn like every day. Like I know in my school, like I feel like there were a lot of holes in my Catholic education, even though I went to Catholic school.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I just feel like there's a lot of holes there, but like those holes were filled in plus some in the convent. Like we learned just all the different traditions, the history of things. And it really is awesome to have because you feel like you have a really firm foundation from which to start, to teach your kids. So that's been really awesome.
Now, the other thing that I wanted to talk to you about specifically is that you and your family, you decided to change rites.
We did. Yes, we did. We did.
And so how did that begin?
Well, that that's an interesting story in and of itself. Um, my first experience with Eastern Catholicism was actually in the convent.
Mhm.
My superior, Mother Mary Gabriel, had actually been really good friends with Archbishop Joseph Raya, who is a Melkite archbishop. He's actually pretty well known. I mean, he died a number of years ago, but he was very well known. And actually, he wrote a bunch of books too. But so she had a friendship with him because she, like I said before, she was a Nashville Dominican,
Mhm.
and she had been the principal, I think the principal, or at least the house superior at the school in Birmingham, St. Rose. And so she taught a lot of Roman Catholic kids and Melkite kids. And so when she began her new community, a lot of the people in the Melkite community knew her and were like, very supportive of her. And so we had a lot of Melkite benefactors. And so sometimes we would go to Divine Liturgy there. That was my first experience of Divine Liturgy.
Mhm.
We are like funerals for the benefactors and stuff like that. And our superior really always spoke really like joyfully about Eastern Catholicism. Like she had the greatest stories of Archbishop Raya and just all the stuff. Like she would talk about him all the time.
Mhm.
And so I had a very positive experience of Eastern Catholicism at the time in the convent. I didn't really think anything of it in the convent. It was just like, hey, this is the way things are. This is great. It's something that I was exposed to that I hadn't been really before. But then after I left and I met and married my husband, we lived in Maryland shortly after we got married. My husband is from here in Hollidaysburg. So whenever we would come to visit, every now and then we would visit the Ukrainian Catholic Church in Altoona. Mm-hmm. And his family had done that ever since he was a kid. And so we would go every now and then. And it was kind of like, I kind of was a little bit confused as to why it was so important to him. I was like, okay, well, this is okay, but why are we doing this? And I remember my husband at one point in time had asked me, like, would you ever consider transferring to, a different Eastern church? And at the time I was like, no way. I am Roman to the core. They're great. Don't get me wrong, but I just never. So it's kind of interesting, how that happened. But one year for Pascha, Easter, we went to Divine Liturgy, and it was just like, I don't know, everything just kind of changed. Like, I opened my heart, and it was like God's grace just flowed in. My eyes were open, and it was like, wow, this is awesome. Like, wow, this is really awesome. So I took that time to like learn about the Eastern Catholic churches and, what all that is. And, what's different and stuff like that. And now granted, it's not like I was doing that all the time because I have 4, young kids. And so I, can't, always be, learning stuff like that. I was busy, but during that time, I tried to learn more and everything. And, we moved back to Hollidaysburg in the beginning of 2017. And we found, I just was really, really like just loving, Eastern Catholic churches and just really wanting to pursue that. So I looked to see if because the church in Altoona is actually quite small. And so I was looking for a bit of a bigger church because, I've got kids and I wanted, to see, different communities and stuff like that. So we found a church, beautiful little Ukrainian Catholic church in Revlock, Pennsylvania. And we went up there and the parish is just amazing, absolutely amazing. And so, we decided to join the parish. And after really praying about it and thinking about it, it's like, what, this is our home. This really is our home. So we petitioned to transfer, and our transfer was accepted. So we are now full members of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church.
Now, is your husband Ukrainian or?
No, actually, that is actually a very common misconception about Eastern Catholics.
Okay.
Some people I'll kind of start with a little bit of a basic. The Catholic Church is actually made up of 24 sui juris churches or self-governing churches that are in communion with one another. Mm-hmm. Each has their own hierarchy, spirituality, theological perspective. The largest by far is the Roman Church or Latin Church, which is what most Catholics in the United States are familiar with. However, there are 23 Eastern Catholic churches in communion with Rome. Mm-hmm. And according to the church, they're equal in dignity. Some people call it a rite. There's actually only 6 rites in the church. There are a few different churches that use the Byzantine rite, for example. Like my church, the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church does, Romanian Greek Catholics, Melkite Greek Catholics, Ruthenian Catholics. They all use the Byzantine rite, and there's quite a number of other churches that do. The Maronite Church, for example, some people are familiar with the Maronite Church. They actually use a different rite. Mm-hmm. So my church is a Byzantine rite church. But a lot of people think that the churches are ethnic churches, but they're actually they're not. Our traditions come from those different places, but they're churches for everyone. So it's not like you have to be Ukrainian to be in a Ukrainian Catholic church or have Ruthenian heritage to be a Ruthenian. It really is for anybody who feels like that's what they want to do.
And so, what is the process like? Like you said, you petitioned. What?
Well, I think there's a couple different ways to transfer, if that's what you feel called to do. And some people don't feel called to actually make the official transfer. Some people just will actually join an Eastern Catholic parish, and they're still canonically Latin Catholic, but they just, they just joined the parish. For us, we really felt like we should. And actually, that's another little bit of a story of like why we did is my husband and I found out that we actually do have Eastern Catholic heritage. So that was kind of like the icing on the cake, where it was kind of like, okay, yeah, let's definitely do this. This is our heritage. Let's do it too. But I mean, we would have transferred anyway, but it was kind of nice to know that that was our heritage too. So we feel good about like passing that heritage on to our children too. But I think one of the ways is you petition your Latin bishop. Like you write a letter and asking to transfer, and then he sends it to the Eastern Catholic bishop. And like once they're in agreement, they send you a letter, and that means that you've transferred. I think there's also a way like where you petition the Holy See, I think. But yeah, I think there's like a couple different ways to do it. The way we did it was like the bishop way.
Now you had mentioned like some people don't formally transfer, that they just attend the parish. Can you receive communion there?
Yeah. Yes, you can. That is actually another really big misconception that people have, is that like if they go to an Eastern Catholic church on a Sunday, they think, oh, well, now I have to go to a Roman Mass. And that's not the case. You can go to any Eastern Catholic Divine Liturgy. It will count for your obligation, even because our calendars are a little bit different. We have some common feast days, but a lot of other feast days are different. But like even if a Roman Catholic has like a holy day of obligation and they go to a Divine Liturgy that day and it's a different feast day, that still counts for their obligation. Like you can receive communion at any Eastern Catholic church, provided you're in the state of grace. And the Divine Liturgy counts for a Roman Catholic's obligation. So you can always feel good that, you don't have to go to a different Mass or anything, that's, we're all in communion with each other, and that counts.
Now I have seen people say that there are some Eastern churches that will not, or are a little bit hesitant to give communion.
Well, that is because you kind of have to go back into the history. Like you have the first 1,000 years of the Catholic Church. You had like the disciples went, to go and baptize all nations. So some went east, some went west. The communities developed around those different cultures of the East and West. So there's always been the East and the West from the early church. What happened in the year 1054 is what's called the Great Schism. And that's kind of what people point to as the separation between East and West. So you have like the Catholic Church in the West, and then now the Orthodox Church in the East, where, we're separated from one another, not in communion with one another right now. Hopefully, we pray for unity again before too long, but that's the separation. And it's the Orthodox churches that are not in communion with Rome. However, most of the Eastern Catholic churches were Orthodox churches that at one point in history came back into communion with Rome. So we have a lot of our traditions and everything is completely in common with the Orthodox, except we have communion with Rome. Now, I think the Maronite Church claims communion with Rome from the very beginning. So that's different. But most of the Eastern Catholic churches were Orthodox churches that came back into communion with Rome. So the Eastern Catholic churches are in communion with Rome. It's the Orthodox churches that are not as yet.
Okay. And so what are some of the differences, at least in your experience?
Yes, there's quite a number of differences. I'd say the biggest thing that people notice is the liturgy. Like if you go to Divine Liturgy, and I would really recommend that anybody, if you have an Eastern Catholic church near you, go and attend Divine Liturgy and see what it's like. It's really a beautiful, beautiful experience. Even if it's not something that you feel called to like transfer to, it's still really great to see the different spiritualities and traditions and stuff that we have in the Catholic Church. So I'd really recommend doing that if you haven't already. The differences in the liturgy itself, it's kind of like the same parts as a Roman Mass, but it's very different. Like you might not notice that the first time you go. For example, we have no musical instruments, and so we just use voices. The entire liturgy is actually sung, which is really, really beautiful. We don't kneel during the consecration. And the reason is the West developed the tradition of kneeling in their culture, like to show respect and subservience. Like think of a medieval knight, kneeling before the king. In
Right.
the East, however, like if you notice, like people stand in, like if an important person comes in the room, you stand up in respect to them. That's kind of our idea of respect and awe and deference, is to stand up in the presence of someone who's important. So that's
Mhm.
why we stand. Now we do have kneeling and prostrations too, but that's more for us like a penitential posture.
Mhm.
So that's why we stand. We also use leavened bread for the Eucharist, as opposed to the West, which uses unleavened bread. We also receive communion a little differently. In our church, the body of Christ is placed in the chalice with the precious blood, and then you'll receive communion from a little spoon in your mouth, like directly in your mouth. So it's not in the hand, as some people do in Roman churches. And also, the priest will say your name before you receive communion. And like if you're visiting, he might ask your name. So that's something to kind of, you just kind of give him your name real quick. So that's something that you might experience
That's
if
what I was
you.
about to say. How does he know whether
Yeah,
how
well,
does
that's
he
the
know
thing.
his
It's like
name?
in the Byzantine church, like the tradition is very communal. It's very big on community. So,
Mhm.
but anyway, the divine liturgy like really engages all of the senses in worship. We have incense, the singing,
Every Sunday?
every liturgy, venerating the icons by kissing them, so we really just engage all the senses. So that's the divine liturgy is probably like the biggest difference that people, especially when you're going from the West to, to from like a Roman Catholic church to visiting an Eastern Catholic church, the liturgy is the biggest difference that you'll notice.
Have your children had any questions about it since you converted as a family
Well,
or
what
converted
happened
with
with us, like
Israelites?
what happened with us is because the Eastern churches, they when a person is baptized as a child, they also receive chrismation, which is confirmation, and Holy Communion at that time.
When
So
you baptized.
when you're baptized, yes.
So did they baptize older?
Oh, they do. But like if you baptize, like we do infant baptism just like the Roman Church does. But instead of waiting for First Communion and confirmation, that's actually given at baptism. And so this past summer, my kids received chrismation and their first Holy Communion, all four of them.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, my kids are young enough where they kind of now, like our church is kind of their church. Like if we happen to go to a Roman mass for something, to them it's very different, which is
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of cool to see that but they've really embraced everything. Like it's so cute to see them at the end of liturgy or before liturgy. Usually we're a little bit late, which is why we do it at the end of a liturgy. They come up, they'll get a little stool and they'll go kiss the icons all on their own. It's really beautiful to see how they've really embraced their Byzantine tradition.
I mean, it sounds. I mean, I haven't even been to a Latin mass, let alone because like you mentioned with your religious education, even though you went to Catholic school, was kind
Mm-hmm.
of lacking, and I think a lot of people can probably identify with that. And I mean, it didn't even occur to me that were Eastern churches in our
Right,
diocese,
right, right,
not in our diocese, but
exactly.
like in the physical location,
Yeah,
like if you're
exactly. I mean, for the
and like
longest
the
time,
Latin mass, I didn't even know that was still like
yeah,
offered until the
yeah,
past few years
yeah.
because I mean my parents never took us and it wasn't advertised. I don't know if it's like when I was younger, if our diocese didn't have any Latin masses or like if it's new or
Yeah,
if we didn't go or I don't know. But
yeah, yeah.
I mean, none of this is anything that I would have ever thought of.
Yeah.
But I mean, it sounds like you said really beautiful, and it's
Oh
something
my
I'm
gosh, it's
doing.
awesome. Like it's so awesome. Like it really is. Like I have a kind of funny story about like our liturgy is kind of like heaven on earth. It's a
Mhm.
foretaste of the heavenly banquet, like the marriage banquet of the Lamb that you hear in the book of Revelation. It's kind of like we are mystically transported to heaven where we participate in the divine liturgy. And that's actually why we don't use musical instruments, because it's like the mystical, in heaven. Um, but it's just so much like that to me. Cause like I remember not too long ago, I had to take my baby. My baby is he was like 18 months old at the time. And you know how kids are at liturgy. They're they're really squirmy and loud. I had to take him outside for a little bit because we don't have like a cry room or anything. And to me, it was almost like I was like going through a portal. It was the weirdest sensation, but it was so cool where it's like on one side was like the heavenly worship. And then when I stepped outside, it was like I had left that into like, the regular normal world. But it was just, it really was striking to me just how beautiful and mystical the divine liturgy is. Like, and it just, to me, it is just amazing to be able to experience that. I mean, it's not to say anything like against the Roman Church. Like we love, like the traditions of the West. We have I mean, that's what we grew up with.
Mhm.
That's we love it. There's like no hard feelings or anything like that there. It's just the East itself just drew us in. And
Well,
yeah.
I mean, I don't think that. I mean, like I said, I've never been to Latin Mass, so I am not knocking, the ordinary form.
Mm-hmm.
But when you go to an ordinary form, Roman Rite Mass, and they're
Mm-hmm.
playing, like Hagen and Haas and shoot, that's not really all that
Yeah, I think especially,
heavenly.
yeah, exactly. And that's like you really get the divine when you go to divine liturgy. It just really, it's like transcendent. It's absolutely beautiful, and it always is. Like every single one of them, they're all sung. It's it's just it's awesome.
um, I feel like this might be like a dumb question, but you mentioned the divine liturgy is different. What about the sacraments? Are the sacraments different in Eastern?
Well, the sacraments, we kind of have a bit like a different theology about the sacraments.
Mhm.
For example, marriage is different in that, like in the Latin Church, the couples are the ministers of, like, they confer marriage on each other,
Mhm.
whereas in the Eastern churches, it's conferred on the couple by the priest. So they have
Mhm.
different understandings of the sacrament, maybe different sacraments, different emphasis maybe, but we still have seven sacraments. Like it's the same in that respect, but there are like little differences. Like chrismation, because I'm trying to think back to when my kids were chrismated, and the difference is like they do use oil and everything, but
Mhm.
like the prayers and everything are different. Um, so there is different understanding of the sacraments, but we have the same sacraments.
Like reconciliation and
Right, exactly.
holy
Yeah, because
war
like
and
confession,
confirmation.
right, like confession in the Byzantine church is a little bit different. But like if you wanted to go to like a Byzantine, like Eastern Catholic priest for confession, you can. And a
Mhm.
lot of Eastern Catholic priests are familiar with the Roman way of doing things because, there's, like I had mentioned before, the Roman Church is way bigger than the Eastern Catholic churches, so more people are familiar with that. So you have a lot of Eastern Catholic priests who will make the Latin Catholics feel more comfortable, going to confession to them. So yeah, so I mean, it's a little bit different, but it's the same sacrament.
So if someone were interested in, you know, checking out an Eastern church, or if they wanted more information, or even if they were considering, changing rites, what would your advice to
My
them?
first my first advice would be to find an Eastern Catholic church and go to liturgy. Like really
Mhm.
go and see, what it's about. Go visit the community. Really, we say that the liturgy is our primary teacher. So the liturgy is
Mhm.
really important to us. And I think that's, just go. I think in general, um, a person, like if they're interested in transferring, they're supposed to have been familiar, or parishioners or going to divine liturgy for at least a year, just
Mhm.
so that it's something that's not like passing, because it's a big deal to transfer.
Mhm.
um, but actually, we have a friend who's a fellow parishioner. His name's Dr. Anthony Dragani. He's a
Mhm.
theologian and professor of religious studies at Mount Aloysius College, that's local to us. He
Mhm.
has a website called East 2 West, the number 2
Mhm.
West, so east2west.org. And that
Okay.
has a lot of like frequently asked questions about like the differences between East and West. So that would be a really good place to look, like if you're interested in like, oh, hey, what's the difference here? Like, what do you guys think about this? What's your theology about this? That's a really great place to get an introduction. There's a book called Light of the East by George Appleyard, which was actually my first kind of introduction into like what are the differences. I remember my father-in-law gave that to me like a couple years ago. Like, hey, look at this. There's also The Face of God is a book by Archbishop Joseph Raya that I had mentioned before, the Melkite Archbishop. That kind of describes like Byzantine spirituality. So if people are interested in that, that's something to take a look. But I would recommend just go, like, really, if you have a Eastern Catholic church near you, go and experience it and see what it's like. Like, if you're going the first time, don't worry about following along. Like, if you want to, you can, but just go and experience it and see, the community will probably be very, very warm and welcoming to you. They'll help you along. If you mess something up or don't sit in the family, nobody cares. They'll, really, we're just happy to have people come and experience our traditions.
The other thing that I think that you could have some good insight on is vocations, being that, you did enter religious life. Do you have hopes that your children will enter religious life, or are you?
I'm going to encourage them to consider it, because I know a lot of people who have said, I've never even considered that. That's not something I would ever even think about. I just knew I wanted to be married. I didn't even think about it. I would encourage anybody to, encourage their kids to, think about it. Like to expose them to religious life. Like, if you have any religious communities that are near you, go visit. Like, a lot of times they'll have like their prayers open to the public, or at least like a mass open to the public. Go visit. Have the kids be familiar with them. Have the kids, like, invite your parish priest over for dinner at some point in time, so the kids are more familiar with clergy. Just like visit different communities, let them know that, hey, this is something that people do. You obviously don't want to force your kid into a vocation that they're not meant to, because I tried to force myself into a vocation that I wasn't meant to. It wasn't that great. God turned it in. God used it for good. Don't get me wrong, and God always does. But really show your kids that it's something that people do nowadays. It's not. Religious life is still very alive and vibrant in the church today, and it's definitely an option. Potentially for them.
And what do you think as parents we can do to increase vocations in general, especially since, here in the United States, it's a big problem, especially with priests.
Right. I would say, honestly, just have like a domestic church, make the faith something that is part of your whole life. Don't let it be something that you just do on Sundays, or you just do, for holy days of obligation. Make it like, kind of weave it into your life, like the liturgical year, follow the liturgical year, celebrate the feast days, teach your kids about like certain prayers, like, oh, hey, here's the rosary. Or like for us, like if you want to pray, the Jesus prayer, and, just teach the kids different prayers, different forms of prayer, and just how important prayer is in your life. That it's something that the faith is something living. It's not just something that we do, like we compartmentalize, and it's something we do only sometimes, but that it's just, it's part of our life,
Well, and now I have another question that's kind of changing the subject, and it might be a little dumb, but
probably not dumb.
Well, you mentioned like praying the rosary and everything. And obviously I'm sure that the Eastern Church, like, they pray the rosary, but it makes me think of like the feast days, or like, Our Lady of Guadalupe. Like, I'm assuming that Eastern churches venerate these same apparitions and saints.
We have different traditions. Like we're in communion with Rome, so we love all the Western saints too, but we actually have like Eastern traditions and customs and things like that. So I think for like the Ruthenian Church, they actually do have Our Lady of Guadalupe on their calendar. But there's some saints, like especially modern saints, that actually aren't on our calendar, which doesn't mean that we don't think they're saints. It's just like that's not our custom. And actually a lot of like the rosary itself is actually like a Western custom. There's a lot of Eastern Catholics who do pray the rosary like as a private devotion, but it's actually not a specifically Eastern custom. We have other forms of prayer that are our own tradition. So but yeah, like that, like we're in communion with Rome. We love everybody. So, even if the saints aren't on our calendar or anything, we still, love and accept them as saints and everything. So
while Our Lady of Fatima might be for the Eastern Church someone that, well, that's nice, but you have your own Eastern, venerations and apparitions.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah.
Okay.
But that doesn't mean like, I mean, because people have private devotions. Like I would love for like if people we have we pray the Jesus prayer on what's called a prayer rope, which is similar to a rosary. It has a special knot that actually has a story behind it, which is actually kind of cool. But so we pray the Jesus prayer, which is Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner. We just pray that over and over and over again. And actually, a book about that is called The Way of a Pilgrim. And it kind of describes, it's actually a really good spiritual book about the Jesus prayer, you know, just in how beautiful it is in one's spiritual life. But anyway, that's beside the point. I kind of lost my train of thought now. But so we have like, so like if a Roman Catholic wants to use a prayer rope and pray the Jesus prayer, that's totally cool. Like that's awesome. Just like a lot of Roman Catholic churches, you'll see they have like icons. Just like, cause like our tradition is to have icons. Like we don't have statues in our churches, or at least I know like Maronite churches, I think do have statues, but we use icons. But that's great. Like if a Roman Catholic wants to, you know, have icons, that's awesome. You know, like it's great to make, like a lot of people say that the East and West are like lungs. You know, there's two lungs, and to breathe with both lungs. So, you know, it's a beautiful thing to have differences, but yet we're all in communion. You know, like I just really love that. You know, there's just different traditions, different customs, different theology, but it's not incompatible. You know, that's okay. You know, we're all together.
Yeah, and I mean, it's certainly, I mean, just I don't have experience, but it's just from what it sounds like. I mean, an Eastern church not having Our Lady of Guadalupe on the calendar doesn't mean they're taking away from Our Lady of Guadalupe. Just like a Roman Catholic might feel closer to Our Lady of Lourdes than they do Our Lady of Guadalupe. I mean, it's not taking away from one or the other. It's just your own personal kind of favor.
Like our Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, we had has a special icon of Our Lady of, I think it's Zarpanitsia. I don't know if I'm saying that the right way. I don't know if I pronounce like half of these things the right way. You know, anyway. But that's like there's a special story behind it. Just like my parish is called the Protection of the Blessed Virgin Mary. And that actually has a story of how she appeared to people to protect them from invaders who were coming to attack them. So, you know, we actually do have, you know, stories like that and you know, different icons that we venerate of Our Lady like that. But, you know, like I said, like, it's all cool. It's all great. You know, like it really is. It's all good.
Well, I think with that, we are going to go ahead and wrap it up. Wanted to say thank you again to Carrie for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been really fun. Thank you.
Yeah, this was a really interesting conversation. I feel like I learned a lot. And it's a lot of good insight too, especially about religious life, because, you know, that's something that I think feels a little foreign for a lot of people. And I have the links of the things that you mentioned, a couple of the books from the East to West, and I will post those in the comments for anyone who might be interested.
Awesome.
And just wanted to mention again our Twitter page. In case you're on Twitter, make sure to follow us. It's Twitter. Our handle is Fidelis Women. And make sure to like and share this video if you please. And from all of us here at Fidelis, thank you for joining in and have a great weekend.